we've still got people joining, so we will gently kick off, and hopefully people will be able to kind of pick up as they come in. So I just want to say a big thanks for joining us this morning. I ran through this at the our seminar at Learning Technologies, and so really pleased to kind of share it again with you now. And as I mentioned, we're looking at how to support a continuous learning culture with user-generated video. But this kind of does pan out to lots of different kind of culture campaigns, and hopefully, regardless of what kind of culture program you're running, you'll get some ideas from today to see how user-generated video, user-generated content can support that process. So if I just kick off. Let's see if I can get my slides moving forward. So when we're looking at supporting a continuous learning culture with user-generated video, the bit that we're really expert on is the user-generated video bit. But what's interesting is, you know, kind of what a continuous learning culture is. And we submitted our webinar proposal for Learning Technologies back in 2019, and we were quite surprised to see how many seminars and presentations there were around continuous learning culture at Learning Technologies. It's a really top kind of, you know, theme. It seems to be quite a priority right now. But I just, before we kick off, it'd be interesting just to hear your thoughts on what you think contributes to a continuous learning culture. Just to kick off some ideas, you know, modeling positive leadership behaviors, or engaging your people to improve retention rates. There's a whole bunch of different things that kind of go into this and make a continuous learning culture. So it'd be great if you could just fire in any other ideas of things that you've seen, or behaviors that you want to amplify, that you feel are important to your own continuous learning culture you've seen working well elsewhere. That's a great one from Viv. Anything that's the opposite of blame culture. Yeah, absolutely. It very much about kind of building and rather than knocking things down. And anything else? One of the things that we've seen is around kind of proving that value of learning, helping people understand that taking part in that learning process, making it part of their day-to-day activity is something that really helps that continuous culture, that behavior of continuous learning develop. So I'll carry on. If anything else crops to mind, please do. Oh, thanks, Sally. L&D isn't just seen as a course, but part of everyday life. Absolutely, it's that's so important. Having a regular dialogue about learning, not always bottom of the priority list. Yes, that's very true, Jessa. Seeing it as a kind of embedded part of how we work. Please keep them coming in, because I can refer back to these as we're going. Giving staff the confidence to self-direct learning to learning resources. Yes, absolutely, Chris. Thanks for those. So do keep them coming in as we're going, because these are all kind of really important and kind of key parts to kind of understand what a continuous learning culture is. I was listening to a David James's podcast, and it was quite an old episode where he was interviewing Toby Newman, and Toby was talking about something that surprised him, was the fact that when we learn in school, he felt that it was quite, well, it's common to think about learning as a mandated activity. So it felt quite natural for people coming from the school-based learning environment into a workplace that you kind of expect that kind of mandated, you know, tell me what I need to learn so I can do my job better kind of culture to carry on. But the thing that Toby highlighted that surprised him was that university students have the same kind of attitude. So where they've kind of gone from a traditional mandated sort of learning environment in school into a more open-ended learning environment at university, they haven't necessarily taken that into the workplace. And I thought that was a really interesting point. And it made me think that maybe we don't necessarily learn how to learn, but it's more of a cultural it's a cultural thing that affects us. And if you think about our kind of cultural perspective on the workplace, you know, it goes back just, you know, to the first industrial revolution, where we turn up onto the production line and our line manager tells us exactly what we need to do and what we need to learn. And when we become experts, we pass that on. But even beyond that, into the whole kind of apprenticeship model. And it made me think that if it's a culture thing, then really we are going through a culture change. We're trying to change people's attitudes to how they learn at work. And then when I started thinking about this being more of a change process, then all the sort of typical kind of negative attributes that get applied to any sort of change program or any sort of change anywhere, then you know, we've got a bunch of quite sort of negative attributes to try and overcome, to sort of bring people along and help them look at learning at work as a different activity to that they assume it's going to be, based on how people have done it for hundreds of years. So the thing that we've found is that when you try and mandate that, and we've done this before, where we've kind of gone in thinking, well, we need to help people become more self-directed, sort of self-service or self-managed. It's come up against barriers, and whilst people are receptive to the how and the why, it doesn't actually kind of create that long-lasting impact where people change the way that they learn. And something that we've found kind of more interesting and more powerful is thinking about creating a groundswell of participation. There's like a movement of finding people who are behaving in the way that you want them to, and being able to amplify that, and sort of, you know, using terms more like inspiring curiosity rather than kind of mandating people to do something different. And one of the really powerful things about user-generated self-filmed video is that you really do get that personal interaction with people when you are asking them to talk about the stuff that they're doing now, which is modeling the behaviors you want to see in the future. And if you can get people sharing those kind of real experiences, so it's a bit like spinning your chair around asking, you know, Bob or Jane how to do something. It's that face-to-face kind of authentic interaction. Then you start surfacing some kind of really interesting experiences, which can be quite powerful in kind of creating you know, this movement. And the idea of a movement, I saw Professor Damien Hughes speak at the talent gathering up in Scotland last year, and he was talking about creating a movement around change. And some of the things that you pull out of that are those kind of relatable experiences. So if you've got someone who's is a face that you recognize, someone you trust, they're talking about experiences that you can relate to, they're using a very specific language that you recognize from your own kind of work environment, you cut through a lot of the potential barriers which lead people to sort of distrust or fear or get stressed about some of the things that are being spoken about. And that kind of authentic language, that authentic experience can cut through. And that enables you, through the voice of people who, as I say, are modeling those future behaviors, you can then start inspiring people to sort of change their behaviors and look at things a slightly different way. So ultimately, we're taking the people who are modeling those future behaviors and allowing them, empowering them to influence, inspire, and motivate everybody else. But the problem that we've historically bumped up against is the fact that our best influencers don't necessarily work in our offices. And when we were producing video in the kind of, the traditional way of taking a film crew out and going out and interviewing people, we very quickly found that sort of large organizations had their best people scattered, if not across the United Kingdom, but across the globe. And when you start costing that up to try and be inclusive with capturing these sort of experiences, those kind of advocacy stories on video, you start getting some pretty expensive numbers. And quite often what happens is that conduct telephone interviews, you can write those interviews up as articles, pieces of content, and maybe blog posts, and they don't necessarily reach the people that you most need to impact. And because the stories have gone through a kind of another layer of editing, they don't have that authenticity that video has to really connect with the people that you need to connect with. And something that we saw happen quite frequently was a lot of these campaigns where L&D teams were trying to surface these behaviors, champion the people who are doing stuff right, just didn't happen because it just felt too complicated, or it wasn't going to make an impact because the format of those interviews couldn't be done in video. And one group head of learning and talent who we were working with a number of years ago asked a really great question, a very sensible question. It's like, why can't our people just share great learning stories with their phones? And it makes a lot of sense. And it's really, when we were first looking at this, we couldn't really understand why asking people just to share really good learning stories, experience stories, advocacy stories on their phones hadn't actually already happened at scale already. And some of the things that we found, some of the barriers that people bumped up against with regard to self-filming was the fact, despite what your kids perhaps tell you, like most people are not natural YouTubers. Filming ourselves and talking about quite complex experiences and sharing them with the world isn't something that we naturally do on a day-to-day basis. We don't think about just picking up our phone and recording something. Most people don't. And there's a number of reasons, and one of those is the fact that we do bump into a lot of technical problems. If you think about the kind of variety, well, we've got kind of Apple and Android, and then there's a bunch of different tools for recording. And then if you're getting people to edit as well, you can get into a quagmire of technical challenges, which are not only very hard to support, but what we often find is if people hit one or two of these, then that's enough of a barrier to stop them from participating and contributing. When we were going out and interviewing people and conducting pre-interview telephone interviews, what we found on reflection that we were doing was helping people reflect. And the interviewer in a traditional filming experience is like a silent moderator. They're guiding and structuring people's thoughts to help them condense what could be quite a complex experience into something that is quite a simple narrative that is going to be enjoyable and valuable for somebody to watch. We're not so great at doing that off the bat, and subsequently, if we try and do this, we tend to see a lot of videos are quite long and rambling, and the output of that is that teams end up having to do a lot of video editing to enable that content to be something that can be distributed. And then very lastly, when we are transferring video files to corporate networks, there's a number of technical challenges that we face. Now, we probably, as kind of learning and development professionals we transfer, Dropbox, Google Drive, a whole range of file sharing services, which are very easy to use. most normal people don't ever really use those sort of systems, and they see file transfer happening kind of invisibly. So they don't necessarily understand what those systems are or how they work on their phones. And also, you know, if your IT team get wind of using those sort of tools, then it becomes a problem pretty quickly. So they were the main challenges we saw, really, with people just picking up their phone and recording stuff themselves. I'm not sure if any of you have experimented with getting people to record video. And I do speak to quite a few teams where they have got people potentially out in the field sharing knowledge and stuff like that, and that people are attempting to do this. But I'm just wondering, have you seen any examples, or do you recognize some of the challenges that we pinpointed there with trying to share ideas, knowledge, advocacy on phones? Chris mentions the issue with transferring large files. It really is such a problem, and it's it's kind of disappointing, because you'll have gone through so many hoops to get to that point, and it really is the sort of final hurdle. And for us, when we were kind of experimenting pre-StoryTagger to see how this could be done, it was so disappointing to recognize that after we'd actually managed to get some people to record some videos, that we just couldn't get them to a corporate network. Sound problems with mobiles, yeah, absolutely. And it's again, I think it's down to people not necessarily understanding what is required to record a video. And you know, it's helping people produce. Doesn't have to be amazing quality. I mean, personal video isn't popular because it's got the kind of glitz and shine of marketing content, but you do need to be able to hear what people are saying, and there has to be, you know, some sort of aesthetic quality to inspire people to watch and take note of what is being shared. Yes, so again from Sally, different phones, different ways for recording, sound and backlighting issues are often a problem. That's absolutely right, Peter. And this goes back to that first point of people not being natural YouTubers. We don't necessarily know how to do this stuff, and there's no reason why we should. You know, it's a new behavior, it's a new activity, and I think even going through the process of reflecting on an experience and condensing that into something to be shared, that should be enough. Having all the technical stuff around the outside of it as well can be a step too far. It might also not be seen as work. That's a really interesting point, Sally. And I think you know, that again is a sort of goes back to the sort of cultural side of kind of where learning fits into that flow of work and the different activities that people go through as part of that learning process. And Peter, you mentions that users simple guidelines, but recording quality can still be an issue. It's really good to hear that you're doing that and kind of working through some of these problems, though, Peter. And what we see is, and when you are able to help people to structure their thoughts and to be able to capture and record and share that video content, you can surface a lot of the really useful stuff that's in head reflections, knowledge that people have got, advocacy, feedback, and focus that into short, succinct, reasonably produced videos that are very watchable. And those individual experiences are really powerful at supporting a lot of the priorities that we're seeing across L&D at the moment. So all the way from supporting performance, demonstrating value, kind of aligning L&D to business needs, those human stories from the shop floor, if you like, you know, really powerful ways of helping bring people along, understand the kind of day-to-day experience in the context of some of these L&D priorities. And we firmly believe that individual stories from people working in large organizations can very much support some of the real business needs that we're seeing surfacing in, this decade, and started surfacing the decade before as well. So producing that next generation of leaders, looking at future of work, top talent, kind of the culture change piece. Interested just to hear your thoughts on whether you've got experience of using personal stories to support some of these kind of priorities, and whether you believe that some of these individual stories can help you, kind of inspire and train the next generation of leaders, or, support some of the skills that are surfacing within your organization, and kind of breaking some of the best practice out of silos and distributing it across the organization. You can just anything in the in the chat window of experiences that you've had from that. So Peter mentions we tried them with mental health first aid with some success. Excellent. That's really good to hear, Peter. So were you capturing, say, some of the stories from people who had first-hand experience of those challenges, or people who've been supporting them? I got a message from Cheryl that Sally, why people became first aiders. Yeah, it's a really powerful story, and we've seen some of those reflections coming through in content that we've captured, and you get some really powerful human stories of and people sharing kind of a really kind of personal impact they've had from that first aid experience, especially from some of the their first experiences of actually delivering first aid to people. It's really great content, and Sally shared some examples of legacy stories. I'm just scrolling up the chat. What legacies meant to us, introducing people. Okay, yes, yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Okay. There's a couple of good and interesting examples of how video has been used so far. What I want to just share next is some examples of how some of our customers have used StoryTagger, kind of aligning to some of these different priorities, and hopefully that'll give you some ideas of how kind of user-generated video, structured storytelling can support some of these kind of culture change programs, and some of the other sort of priorities and business needs that you're probably seeing. So the first one is going back to that leadership piece and inspiring kind of open leadership and colleague engagement. We saw City and Guilds capture personal videos from senior leaders, senior sponsors, to support a merger program they were going through, and it helped them share their vision, but it also enabled them to make everyone feel part of something, to feel part of that story. It helped pull teams together, break down silos, build trust, kind of empathy and authenticity around that story. And kind of one of the important things about sort of merger programs, and a kind of bunch of other similar projects as well, is to be able to have that repeatable sponsor voice coming through to make sure that program stays on track from a sort of project perspective, but also that brings everybody along. And one of the things the City and Guilds fed back to us was that it was really powerful for the wider team to be able to have those personal introductions and hearing what the kind of objectives and values of the team coming into the organization, but also the senior leaders from within city and guilds talking about it openly. It helped bring everyone along, and as I mentioned, feel part of something, feel part of this change program. Sharing what great leadership looks like in organizations. So it's something that I know some teams do, but quite often you go into a leadership program and you don't necessarily have a really great idea, apart from your own personal experience, what great leadership looks like in your organization and why that matters. So being able to surface the best leadership behaviors and the impact that they've positively made to kind of the widest possible cohort of new leaders coming through is a really powerful way of helping people understand not only what they need to do, but why they need to kind of put that extra effort in, or why they need to, you know, be part of this learning experience to achieve, you know, some of the, you know, the best practice that other leaders within the organization have had. And celebrating the people who are putting themselves forward and sharing this sort of material is really important as well. I think creating any sort of user-generated content has more in common with running a sort of social experience than it does with necessarily any other kind of program. So the importance of celebrating people who are contributing, kind of motivating and nudging people to become part of that creation process is really important. The next one I wanted to look at this morning was around developing future skills and capabilities. And Cambridge University had a really interesting use of StoryTagger, where they are capturing reflections from their MBA students at Judge Business School, who were going into interviews with big tech companies, and they were coming out of that having you know, kind of learned a lot from that experience, but then they are nudged and prompted to share that with the wider cohort, so that whole team learns as a group. So some of the things that have gone well, some of the mistakes that have been made can be amplified and shared with the whole cohort, so everybody is learning from each other's activities. And creating or sort of reflecting on these experiences that we have and structuring those into stories are really important skills that we all need to develop. So not only making reflective practice more of a sort of day-to-day habit, but sort of nudging us to think a bit more deeply and creatively, and also building some sort of emotional intelligence around the way that we think and look back on some of the experiences that we've had, and being able to hone an elevator pitch to be able to very succinctly share kind of value proposition, share what something means to individuals within the team, to the organization, is a skill that's very important to lots of people within organizations. So nudging and encouraging people to take part in this kind of process helps build up really important skills, as well as being able to distribute great knowledge and advocacy across your organization. Developing and growing careers is a really interesting one. And when we first started producing video content, like many years ago, career stories was one of the staples that we used to help show the benefit and the value of learning within an organization through the voice of people who had, you know, taken that extra step to engage in that learning process and sharing what they'd done. Adidas recently used user-generated video to onboard about 250 sales colleagues to their new flagship store in Oxford Street. And they used this format to get the new starters to talk about their first experience with the Adidas brand. And they were able to use those videos to wrap in their own brand values into the stories, the experiences that people were starting to work there. So it created a very personal connection, a real authenticity between the brand values and people's actual real world experiences. Having a workflow around career stories is really important. That slide that I shared earlier about sharing another career story on text, we need to move away from those text-based career stories and be able to spend a few minutes looking eye to eye with the person telling that story. We're so used to face-to-face interaction. It's only recently that we've been communicating in non-face-to-face environments. So being able to see someone's face, the expressions, there's so much hidden communication in kind of non-face-to-face interactions, that being able to see someone tell their own career story, you get the extra depth of, you know, maybe the pain or the anguish or the effort that they put into developing their career. And that helps us get a much better picture of what it actually takes to start designing our own journey, so we can start replicating and taking on board some of the best stuff that they've been doing. And you know, aligning roles to core purpose. So again, that goes back to that point I was mentioning earlier about feeling part of a story. So the way the organization is running isn't just happening around you, you're actually part of that and you're brought into that story. So that's going back to how City and Guilds were using user-generated video to bring people along in that merger. That can be used in roles as well. So you can see how your own role contributes to the success of the organization, feeling part of the organizational story. Amplifying innovation and curiosity. We've been excited to see IKEA using user-generated video in hackathons. So the teams are running experiments, it's part of the competition. They're creating learning logs, talking about the innovation and the experiments that they're running. External inspiration is brought in through people watching those learning logs and being able to feed into that. And a lot of those experiences can then be shared through the organization to can amplify some of the ideas, some of the workflows that people have gone through, and help create that culture of innovation throughout the business. I was reading an interesting article the other day, how kind of innovation is something that gets talked about in kind of management meetings quite a lot, but doesn't really exist in the on the shop floor so much. But these kind of stories around innovation, they don't use the I word, it's the activity and the behaviors that we see people who are innovating are the ones that can really inspire people and encourage them to experiment themselves and also share the results of what they have been working on. Democratizing learning and performance. So the Verizon EMEA sales team used user-generated video to capture experiences from their highest performers. So these were all people of the wider team. They knew, they recognized, they knew their faces. So when they said, "This is how I do it," then people sat up and they listened and they took some of that language on board. So when the best people were talking about, so when I go in, I have this kind of meeting and I use this sort of language and I explain things in this sort of way, it was very quick and easy for the rest of the team to take some of the best bits of that behavior, that language, and be able to wrap it into the way that they performed themselves. So that was really using this kind of self-filmed content in the flow of work to very quickly spread good practice and help people solve real-time problems. Another thing that we're seeing a lot of sort of user-generated video being used for is being able to capture knowledge from SMEs and enabling them to very quickly share the important information that's captured in their heads and being able to distribute that to learning teams, so that content can be used in a lot of different ways. So you're getting the video content, but that can be then created so that it can be repurposed into lots of different formats to support learning through different platforms, different ways to get that core knowledge from your SMEs into people's kind of workflows, however they choose, really, whether that's through podcasts, through video, maybe through kind of short written articles, or through digital learning experiences. And lastly, Bouygues Energy used user-generated video to enable them to very quickly capture feedback from teams in a lot of different locations to be able to curate award testimonials. And the interesting thing about that was, rather than just sort of sending out requests for people to write stuff or to fill in a SurveyMonkey questionnaire, the questions are quite open-ended, so they were able to surface some feedback on the impact that the program had made in a way that potentially could have been missed or lost previously, and being able to watch people who had been witnessing that impact talking about what that felt like, communicating some of the experiences, the positive experiences people in the field had from that program. It enabled them to put together a very powerful award submission that had a lot of kind of human stories, a lot of impact built in to that through the testimonials they captured on user-generated video. We've mentioned learning logs previously through the IKEA team, but the learning logs are a really great way of communicating the impact that programs have had on individuals. We see a lot of leadership teams encouraging people to create video learning logs, which can then be created into montages at the end. So when they're going and sharing the value of the program with their stakeholders, they've got the data story of the impact. They've also got the human story with video, and sometimes that human story, that video content, where they're seeing face-to-face reflections from the people who've been doing the learning and how it's been impacting and supporting them in their roles, is a really powerful way into some of those data stories. And of course, celebrating success is something that we all probably wish we did more of, but quite often teams who are distributed across lots of locations, potentially a lot of people working at home, being able to bring people together and celebrate success, and again having that face-to-face experience with people, sort of sharing what's worked well, what's made great customer experiences for them, and being able to kind of elevate and share it out of those silos is a really great way of using personal video. So I hope that's given you some ideas on where video reflections, user-generated video can support in a way that brings up, as Damien Hughes said, in that kind of movement to surface the best behaviours, the best activities of your people, and using those voices to inspire others. We've got a great toolkit that you can grab today. The URL's just there, storytagger.com/learning culture. And there's some really great resources there. You don't have to use StoryTagger to take advantage of these. There's a lot of great tips around how to shoot better video, how to help your people create sort of more useful video. I go a bit deeper with some of the ideas for where user-generated video can support kind of culture change. So do grab that toolkit. As I say, it's a great resource. I spot Cheryl's busy answering some questions. I'm just going to take a look and see. Jessa makes a great point about people being uncomfortable about being on camera and hearing their own voice. It's really true. When someone asks you to make a video, the first thing that you think is, you know, how I really don't want to be filmed. I hate the sound of my own voice, and it's going to be a really uncomfortable experience. But the thing that we found is they're not the problems that prevent people from doing it. And the thing that people care most about is not sounding kind of, you know, not stupid, but not having something of value to share. And it's really easy for us to think, well, I haven't got anything worthwhile, I haven't got anything valuable to share. Don't speak to me. Go and, you know, speak to Jane down the corridor. She's far brighter and more eloquent than I am. And the great thing about supporting people with those reflective structures, the sort of structured storytelling, is that you guide them through that process of surfacing a lot of the great stuff that they do know. And what we often find is that when people are helped to share stuff of value, and they can see that there's going to be value to their peers, their team, and the whole organization, it overcomes a lot of those kind of perceived barriers that we would expect to be the problem. And people actually feel pretty good about sharing this kind of stuff. Peter makes a point that not having a recording team and being able to do a recording their own time situation helps a lot. I absolutely agree, Peter. I personally, if I'm being filmed by a video crew, I just fall to bits and I can't do it. I'm more than happy to tuck myself away with my phone and create content. But if I've got someone interviewing me and a camera operator staring at me, kind of raising his eyebrows every time I stutter and my way through a sentence, I find it a really painful experience. And Sally, yeah, I agree. I think we can all feel that we don't have enough experience to share something of value to our colleagues. And I think helping people understand that they do have something of value to share and supporting them through that process is one of the things that I'm really passionate about. And you see a transformation in people when they start off that process by saying, I've got nothing of value to give. You take them through the kind of guided process of helping them to tell their story, say, surfacing some of the good stuff that they know. And when they watch that video back, you can sort of see a light bulb go off in their heads and they think, oh, actually, that is a pretty useful thing that I've shared there. I can see how other people would get use out of it. And then when they get that feedback loop from their colleagues or people who potentially never met within the organization before, telling them how powerful and impactful that video has been on them, then that's when that whole process really starts to elevate people and make them feel as if they are part of that story and they have got a lot to contribute to the organization. Sally, we don't have time to show you the tool today, but we'll share you a link. I think our Cheryl's on that, and you can take a look at StoryTagger, and I'd be really happy to pick that up with you in the next couple of weeks and show you around if that sounds useful. I'm just checking on the time. I think we've slightly gone over the 11:45 time. So if you've got any other questions, please do put them into the chat. But whilst you're doing that, I just wanted to say thanks so much for joining us today. I hope it's been useful. I hope we've given you some ideas around how this personal video, user-generated video, selfie video, whatever you want to call it, can really play an important role in elevating some of the experience and knowledge of people across our huge organizations and helping us kind of really solve some of the kind of critical challenges and problems that our organizations are facing, and helping people feel as if they're part of that story and that they're part of the success as well. So once again, thanks so much everybody for coming along today. Really appreciate your time. We'll send out an email that it's got a link to book some time on my calendar. If you want to have a chat about any of this stuff or see StoryTagger, I'm really happy to share that with you. But otherwise, I hope that the weather is kind to you for the rest of the week. And thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you from the whole StoryTagger team who's sort of sitting around me right now. Okay, thanks everybody.